The last photo from Flight 815. Something keeps disappearing. Archival evidence. It started like a normal flight. October 12, 2009. Flight 815 had already climbed above the Pacific and settled into the quiet rhythm that every long-distance flight eventually finds. The engines hummed with that deep, distant vibration that slowly becomes part of the air itself. Soft lights glowed above the aisle, casting warm, domestic pools of amber on the aged fabric of the seatbacks. A flight attendant pushed a drink cart down the narrow corridor, her steps almost silent, the quiet clink of plastic cups the only sound breaking the low-frequency drone. Most passengers began preparing for the long night ahead, reclining, covering themselves with blankets, retreating into the tiny, localized worlds of their headphones and screens. Nothing felt unusual. Not in any way that makes you sit up or hold your breath. And that detail would later become the most disturbing part of the story. Because strange events rarely begin with chaos. They begin with something ordinary. They begin when everything is working exactly the way it is supposed to. I was sitting in seat 14A. Window seat. Not because I particularly enjoy looking outside during night flights. At that altitude, and especially over the Pacific, there is usually nothing to see except darkness, a black void that feels like the bottom of a well. But a window seat has one advantage. It gives you a wall between yourself and half the cabin. It allows you to watch without being watched. Across the aisle, a man sat in seat 17B. Blue shirt. Short hair. Mid-40s maybe. He looked like someone you would forget the moment you stepped off the plane. The kind of passenger who blends perfectly into the background of public spaces, a face with no sharp angles, no memorable features. But there was one detail about him that kept drawing my attention. His hands. They were moving. Not nervously. Not exactly fidgeting. His fingers tapped slowly against the plastic armrest. Pause. Tap again. Pause. It felt deliberate. Like he was following a rhythm only he could hear, a countdown, or a slow, coded message to no one. At first I assumed he simply hated flying. Some people react strangely once the aircraft reaches cruising altitude, once the understanding sets in that they are suspended in a pressurized metal tube with nothing but logic holding them up. But the plane was completely stable. No turbulence. No sudden altitude change. Just steady, uninteresting flight through a silent sky. About 30 minutes after takeoff, the main cabin lights dimmed slightly, urging the passengers toward sleep. The low drone of the engines seemed to deepen. It was in this deepened hush that the first fracture appeared. The boy sitting in row 16 leaned toward his window and whispered something to his mother. She didn't respond at first. Her eyes were closed, her head tilted, the universal posture of a parent attempting to find a single, stolen minute of rest. Children often invent strange things to break the boredom of long flights. They see animals in cloud formations. They hear voices in the air vents. But he kept pointing outside, pressing his small forehead against the cold glass. Eventually, more to pacify him than out of genuine interest, she leaned closer to the glass. She shaded her eyes against the inside cabin glow, looking past her own reflection. Her expression changed. It wasn't fear at first, more like confusion. Like she was trying to reconcile what her eyes were telling her with what her brain knew to be impossible. Then she quietly pulled the window shade down, the plastic locking into place with a definitive click. "Stop looking out there," she said. Her voice had an edge to it now, a sharp refusal to discuss what she might have seen. There's nothing outside. The boy didn't look away from the shade. But the window was looking back, he whispered. For a moment, nobody around them spoke. Adults have a habit of ignoring unsettling things when children say them. Silence restores normality. The engines continued their low hum. Someone coughed a few rows behind me. Plastic wrappers rustled as passengers opened snacks, reclaiming the ordinary. And then a sound came from my window. Tap. Very soft. Almost polite. Like someone knocking gently on a door, hoping someone would be inside to answer. I turned my head slowly. The window was dark. Completely black. The Pacific Ocean was thousands of meters below us, hidden under a thick layer of cloud, a void beneath a void. At this altitude, at this speed, nothing could possibly touch the outside of the aircraft. But then I saw it. A fingerprint. Pressed against the outside of the window. Oval. Clear. The edges slightly fogged by the atmospheric cold. With visible ridges, the pattern of human skin applied to a surface that no human should be near. At 35,000 feet. That should not be possible. The print remained there for several seconds, illuminated by the tiny reading light above my head. Then another appeared beside it. And another. They didn't slide across the glass like frost or moisture. They touched it, as if something outside was feeling the surface. Testing it. Learning how a plane feels. No one around me reacted, which made the moment even stranger, as if I were witnessing a private negotiation between the aircraft and the night. The man in seat 17B suddenly spoke. His tapping stopped. His voice was calm, too calm, like he was reciting a well-known rule. Don't close the window. The mother in row 16, her hand still resting on the shade tab, froze. Why? She asked quietly. She didn't want to ask. The question was too normal. She should have ignored him. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the dark reflection in the window beside him, not outside, but at his own face on the inner layer of glass. Then he said something that didn't belong in an airplane cabin. Because it likes it when you pretend it isn't there. Nobody responded. The statement was absurd. It was terrifying. The boy's mother kept the shade closed. Minutes passed, heavy and silent. The cabin gradually returned to its quiet rhythm. A flight attendant walked by collecting empty cups. Someone turned off their reading light, the final glow extinguishing. Everything seemed normal again. Deny it, and it stays away. Then the plane jolted sideways. Not turbulence. Not the random, chaotic movement of air pockets during storms. This was smooth. Directed. A smooth sideways tug. More like something had nudged the aircraft gently from outside, testing its stability or marking it. The cabin lights flickered once. A quick, electric eye blink. Then again. When they stabilized, I glanced across the aisle. Seat 17B was empty. No footsteps. No movement. No one squeezing past in the narrow aisle. The man had simply vanished. The seatbelt remained buckled over the smooth, gray fabric of the cushion. The indentation on the cushion looked completely untouched, as if a body had never warmed it. A flight attendant passed the row a moment later. She glanced briefly at the seat, then continued walking. As if nothing had changed, as if the manifest had been updated mid-flight. I leaned slightly forward. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Wasn't someone sitting there? She looked at the seat again, then shook her head, a confused frown appearing on her face. "No, sir. That seat's been empty since boarding." She said it with absolute certainty. Something cold settled in my stomach. because I had watched that man sit there for nearly an hour. I had listened to his tapping. I had heard his voice. And now the plane itself seemed to disagree. That was when I decided to take the photograph. Nothing dramatic. No attempt to capture a ghost. Just a casual picture down the aisle. A simple record of a long trip. My phone camera opened. I raised it slightly, framing the rows of gray seats and the silent passengers, and pressed the shutter. Click. For a moment, the entire cabin seemed to pause. The engines felt quieter. The boy in row 16 turned around and stared directly at my screen. Not at me. At the image itself. "Don't keep it," he said. "If you keep it, it keeps you." His voice sounded older than a child's voice should, flat and adult and without emotion. I looked at the screen, my hand trembling slightly. The photo showed exactly what I expected. Rows of seats. Passengers resting quietly. Overhead bins closed. But something felt wrong. Seat 17B was occupied. The man in the blue shirt was sitting there again in the image. But his head was turned toward the camera. Directly toward me. And his face refused to resolve. Not blurred by motion. He was perfectly still. Blurred in a different way. Like the pixels couldn't agree on what shape his features should take. A static hiss of digital artifacts in place of eyes and a mouth. The boy whispered again. He switched. I didn't understand. But I kept looking at the screen. The man in the photo continued his static gaze. Then I noticed something else. In the reflection of the window beside me, the aisle looked slightly different. Wider. Longer. Almost identical to our cabin, but slightly out of sync. The chairs arranged just slightly wrong, like someone rebuilt the plane from a vague memory. I turned around. The real aisle behind me looked normal. Empty and dimly lit. When I looked back at the glass, the reflection remained. Rows of seats. Passengers sitting quietly in their reflected world. Except there were fewer of them. The boy leaned closer to the window, his voice barely a breath. "Don't stare too long," he said. But his mother opened the shade again. She wanted proof. She wanted to reclaim logic, to show him there was nothing but night. The darkness beyond the glass looked endless. Cloud tops far below, glowing gray under a distant moon. Stars above. Nothing unusual. Normal night flight. She laughed nervously, a sound of profound relief that lasted half a second. Then she noticed the fingerprint. On the inside of the window. Our side. Fresh. Wet. Oval. Clear. With visible ridges. Matching the ones on the outside. Her laughter stopped. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then she stood slowly. Walked into the aisle without looking at her son. He grabbed her sleeve, but she didn't react. And sat down in seat 17B. The boy started crying. A choke of silent tears. "She traded places," he whispered. I didn't move. I didn't heroically pull her back. Because something told me stepping into that aisle might complete the exchange. If you step into the edited space, you are written out of the main text. Minutes passed, heavy with a shared denial. Then another passenger disappeared. A man 2 rows down. No screams. No panic. Just confusion from his neighbor, then acceptance. Was someone sitting here? I thought that seat was taken. Memories faded quickly. Deny the presence, and it denies your presence. The cabin itself was forgetting people. Editing its manifest. But the photograph didn't forget. Each time I looked at the image on my phone, something had changed. Another seat empty. Another reflection shifted. A head that had been turned was now facing forward in the photo. Small revisions, like the image was cleaning itself up, finalizing the record. And in the window beside me, the other cabin grew more crowded. Silent figures stood in the aisle there, motionless, heads tilted, as if listening for an invitation to switch. Then I saw the man in the blue shirt again. Not in our cabin. In the reflection, standing in the aisle of the other cabin. He raised one hand slowly, pressing it against the glass. From the other side, his fingers looked too long, too patient. Behind him stretched rows of empty seats in the duplicate world, ready to be filled. That was when I realized something. The plane wasn't losing passengers. It was rebuilding another flight. Somewhere just beyond the reflection, it was trying to make the cabin full again. It wasn't a glitch. It was an edited space. My phone screen suddenly went dark. The image vanished. No error message. No warning. Just finality. Later investigators called it corrupted data, camera malfunction, digital artifact. They preferred simple, technical terms that kept the world safe. But I know what I saw. Because ever since that night, whenever I sit beside a window on a flight, I do one thing. I check the reflection, not the view outside. The glass itself. I check for fingerprints. On the inside. Sometimes the reflection looks deeper than it should. Like the cabin behind my reflection has more room than it's supposed to. And sometimes I think I see a man in a blue shirt standing quietly in the reflected aisle. Waiting. Tonight, if you fly, or if you sit in a quiet room with a window beside you, don't treat the glass like it's only showing what's outside. Sometimes, it shows what's been saved. And sometimes, what's been saved is still trying to make the cabin full again.